Uh, so hello everybody. It is November the 17th, so it's a holiday for schools, and it is the anniversary of a bleak day in our history, but it is also the day for our November event. And we are here with the Iatefl Vice President, my dear friend. So the Iatefl Vice President, Mr. Christopher Graham, and my dear friend Chris. And I am wearing my Iatefl trustee t-shirt so that you can ask
Yes,
me anything that you want about Iatefl so that I can tell Chris to tell you about it.
I won't know
So,
the answers.
so I'll tell you a very, very, very brief story. It took me like 2 minutes as I was watching the videos from the people who would be running for the elections at Iatefl. And although I was supporting another candidate, I saw Chris's video, and I was like, he's a definite win. He's won. Yeah, he's there. Yeah, yeah. Iatefl material. So
Oh,
he's
it's very
Iatefl,
kind of you.
Iatefl through and through, but not just. I cannot tell you what that person does in his life because he does so much. First of all, he has been one of the founders of ELT Footprint, which also explains what Green Iatefl is all about as well. He works with EFL teachers and students in fractured communities. I think, Chris, this deserves its own webinar at some point when you have time, because it intrigued me. And also, he has been one of the founding members and one of the people who has donated his time to run Equal Voices in ELT. That's how I met Chris, actually. He's one of the mentors. Equal Voices in ELT will be running for Tesol Greece. And should I say that serves us well because we also tried to organize it. Nobody replied. So it's very important to know that very, very important people donate their time in these initiatives, and there is a lot of learning that can be done. So Chris is here today to talk to us about a very important Iatefl initiative, one that wouldn't have crossed my mind, to be honest. But the more I hear about it and the more I read about it, the more I feel that we need it. So the floor is all yours, Chris, to tell us what can we do about Green Iatefl? Yes, us.
Yes, you. Thank you, Maria. Thank you for inviting me. First of all, it's very kind of you, and thanks for
Thank
saying
you for
such nice.
accepting.
Well, works both ways. Thank you for making me sound much more interesting than I actually am in real life. But anyway, that's always the pleasure of doing talks. Let me just do some technological magic. Can you see the slides, Maria? Is that okay? Yeah, loud and clear. Good. This is about our new initiative, Green Iatefl, but it also isn't about it because Green Iatefl is only mentioned right at the end, I think. But you'll see how hopefully how it's organised. If you have any questions, I suggest you tap them into the chat, and Maria can make sure that I see them. I'll try and finish before 4 o'clock London time, which is 6 o'clock your time. I'll do my best to. But it is being recorded, so if you do need to go and do something more interesting, then of course you can go and find the recording at a later date. Um, okay, well that Maria's already told you that all the stuff about me. For my what I call my day job, for my non-volunteering work, I do specialize in working in conflict zones and post-conflict zones with teachers. I don't work so much with traumatized students. I work with traumatized teachers. And I'm actually going off to a post-conflict zone at the end of this week for 3 weeks. The next week, I should say, for 3 weeks. I find that very interesting, and I'm also interested in obviously the interaction between climate change and ELT, and won an Elton for that a few years ago. So let's move forwards a little bit. That's the kind of areas that I want to look at to try and answer some questions about sustainability in ELT, and then try and drill down to some practical examples of what we are doing, whether we're doing enough, and perhaps what we could do as time passes. And the action planning is your bit, not my bit, basically. Um, Before you read that, let me tell you about this man, James Rebanks. I'm in my house in London at the moment, but I live most of my life in the south of Scotland. And James Rebanks has a farm in the Lake District in the far northwestern part of England. And his family have had the farm for about 400 years. He's run it, one after another. And when his father died or retired, I think died, he inherited the farm. And he was horrified at about the environmental impacts of the farm. So he wrote this book called English Pastoral. Um, and there's a quotation. I'll let you to read it. And I find it quite a powerful little piece of writing. That's a quotation from English Pastoral. And I think that last paragraph is the powerful one. Are we the ones who had so little courage or wisdom we turned away from our responsibilities? And he has absolutely reversed many of these changes in the farm. They no longer use chemical fertilizers. They care for the animals a lot better. They protect the wildlife, the woodlands, the forest. He's done a lot. And as I say, his family have owned the farm since the English Civil War, so it's for a very long time. So, but he has this great sense of responsibility. I do recommend the book. Actually, it's not a book you might necessarily want to read about agriculture in northwestern England, but it's absolutely fascinating. He's also an Oxford English graduate as well, and so he's not just a farmer, so he's also an academic. Um, well, here's the question: what is sustainability in ELT? I mean, sustainability is one of these words that everybody's heard of, but if you actually pin people down and say, what is it? They say, well, I don't know. Um, and I know this because at the Iatefl conference 2 years ago in Harrogate, yes, it was Harrogate, our colleague Anka, who's on the Iatefl live team, was walking around the conference asking teachers what they thought sustainability was. The majority said they didn't know. One or two tried to define it, and interestingly, quite a number said they didn't want to talk about it. And that was a very interesting category. And in fact, Anchor and I did a webinar about this very thing, which you'll find on the Iatefl website if you want to explore it. So, what is it? So, I wrote to all our trustees and also to Anchor from the Iatefl Live team and said, what do you think it is? And I just got a few little extracts here. As a cat, I like cats. Margarita's got a cat there. Um, Here's what one of the trustees said: that everything was actually in the last edition of Iatefl Voices, but these are little extracts from it. This is what one of my colleagues said. Talked about impact in both a positive way and a negative way. If we start with the negative way, it's about how we use paper, study abroad. All these things have an impact on the environment. But the positive way is the educational side of what we do. We can actually help students engage with climate change by reading about it, by videos, whatever we use in class. So he says sustainability has two things, positive and negative, which is interesting. Somebody else here, that's near my house in Scotland, by the way, that she says here, and I really find the second part interesting from the word secondly, to be sustainable within our profession, using budget sustainably, using personnel sustainability to avoid the high burnout rates. Think about where the power is to make sure our teaching and our version of English is future proof and possible to maintain. So she stretched the idea of sustainability in another direction about the idea of our responsibility to our colleagues and responsibility around money, around sustainable budgets. So that's another definition to look at. Those horses, by the way, are called Clydesdales. They're heavy horses, and they were bred as war horses. They were used in medieval times by knights because they're small and strong. So there we are. Somebody else said in ELT, creating a self-access centre is only a successful project if you thought through the costs and the staffing. So are projects sustainable? Many of us who work in institutions, universities or schools see projects that are started or half started, never finished, because it turns out there's not enough money to sustain them. So he talks about sustainability around projects as well. So there's lots of directions that this idea of sustainability can go in. But ultimately, it comes down to me to opportunities and responsibilities for us. And we are a unique global community. That's a photograph I took of some teachers in Mozambique a few years ago when I was working there. John Nagg, who used to work for the British Council, some of you may have heard John, he's retired now. He calculated, I don't know how he calculated this, but he did calculate that at any one moment, there are 1.5 billion people learning English, not million, billion people learning English of all ages. That may seem a ridiculously high figure, but when you think about Chinese, Indian, Brazilian primary and secondary schools, you begin to see how you can get to 1 billion. So we really are a unique global community because we ELT people as a community have a direct hand on those classrooms collectively. We have influence in those classrooms because we are the teachers. We're the people not just teaching, but we're writing materials, we're training other teachers, whatever we do. We have influence over these 1.5 billion mainly young people. Not only, but yeah, the vast majority, of course, will be young people. So I think that makes us rather unique. And the approach that I take to kind of thinking about climate change and sustainability has three stages. The first one is awareness. Oh, yeah, I've heard of this sustainability. Yeah, I don't know really. Oh, yeah, I know something about climate change. I'm not sure what it is. Hearts and minds, to me, is when people discover about the impacts of, for example, the climate crisis and about the importance of sustainability. And in short, they start to get quite angry about it. They think this is ridiculous. The impact of this are awful. We need to do something. And that comes to action. I think ELT, we're somewhere between awareness and hearts and minds. But I think hearts and minds are really important. And I think perhaps with students, once they understand the challenges, but after all, young people are going to have to face. People of my age, we've done the damage. And we're leaving it to the next generation or the next two generations to do something about it. So awareness, hearts and minds, and action. And for me, there's a kind of continuum between ELT and sustainability. And that looks at the two things that we saw before about the damage that we do on one side and the other side, the opportunities we have. So the mitigation is to think about, for example, paper. We use a lot of paper in English language teaching, and much of the paper is used once, single-use paper. So how we think about mitigating the impact we have. And the other side is education. That is the opportunities we have to engage with these 1.5 billion students around the world and help them to engage with the climate crisis. And that's, I was talking to Maria about roads in Scotland. That's the road that I live on. And it's about 30 kilometers like that to get to my house. So it's I live in the middle of nowhere. I was involved in a project for the British Council just immediately before COVID, and it was sort of slightly curtailed because of COVID. And we put a couple of questions, a lot of questions actually, on the Teaching Teens website, aimed at British Council websites is aimed at teenagers. And one of the two questions that I've extracted here. One of the questions was about schools engaging with climate change. This was 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, I suppose. The vast majority said, no, we're not doing anything about climate change in our education. Another question was, would you like to have your English lessons, specifically English lessons, more about climate topics? And you can see nearly 72% said, yes, we would. They're small samples. Later date, I can explain why they're small samples. But and more work that I've done since makes it very clear that teenagers want to engage in this topic in English. They see the language of the climate debate, for better or for worse, to be English. Greta Thunberg speaks English. She does everything in English. So that's why I think that is the case. They understand it's a global crisis, needs a global language. So the question is, what are we doing about it? We as a global community, not necessarily you, that might be you. Excuse me. Well, the first thing we're doing is recycling. Well, recycling, to quote the great singer, that don't impress me much. Sometimes a teacher will come up to me and say, oh, we're doing a lot in our school, we recycle. And I say, what do you want? A Nobel Prize for recycling? It's nothing. Recycling is very much the last resort. Surely we need to be thinking about reducing waste, reusing waste, not just throwing it away, because recycling is basically throwing it away. And a lot of paper, plastic, cardboards that go into the recycling bins are not recycled. It just goes straight into landfill. So recycling, yeah, we're doing that, but it doesn't particularly impress me, as I say. I think other things that we are doing, two things thinking about here, is teachers are working with course books now. They have their existing course books. Um, Course books tend to have a chapter called the environment, our beautiful planet, whatever. And it's often the least interesting chapter. And the danger of having one chapter is children think, okay, we've done the environment for this year, we'll see it again next year. Well, that's not quite how it works when we've got floods and fires and people starving. It's not quite the same as other topics. But our teachers are engaging. They're finding the hook. What I mean by the hook is they're looking at a lesson and thinking, I could make an environmental connection here. For example, if you've got a primary, you've got a chapter about going to the supermarket, going to the market with mum and dad. The hook might be, what do you put the shopping in? Do you put it in a plastic bag, a paper bag, or a cloth bag? Simple, tiny thing, a small tweak. And then you put an environmental spin onto the lesson. Teachers are writing their own content, their own lessons around environmental issues and around sustainability issues. To get more relevance, local impact is what matters. And Greece has seen the impact of the climate crisis, in your countryside, and that's something that students will engage in because it's in their backyard, basically, much more than something in another country. Most of you will probably have seen these United Nations sustainability goals. The great thing about this framework is, and teachers are beginning to use it, if you go to the website where they have a whole range of ready-built teaching materials. And some great graphics. You can see some of the graphics here. Could somebody's got their microphone on? Could they mute it, please? I've got noises, Maria. Can you mute? You've done it. Thank you. If you go to the website, you have got very nice posters you can print out. I think these graphics are brilliant, even for low-level students. You can do a lot with these because they actually tell you what's going on. And these Sustainable Development Goals, notice they're not all around climate change at all. They're around clean water, life on land, life below water, climate action is there. It's number 13, but they're wider than that. And that's something we'll explore a little bit later on. They are genuinely around sustainability. Some course books, they're now appearing in course books. It's beginning to happen. But I would recommend that teachers go to the site because there's lots and lots of stuff that's designed for teaching, not for teaching English, but you can very, very easily adapt if your classes and download them. There's videos, there's PowerPoints, all sorts of things to access. Out of school projects. The reason I put that dog there is this was in Marseille in the summer. I spent the summer in the south of France. The larger of the two dogs, about 5 seconds after I took that photograph, tried to bite me. My French is quite bad, but it's funny how language works. I hadn't heard the word to bite in French for about 30 years, I don't think, but fortunately I recognized it just in time when the woman shouted, "She bites." But out of school projects, how green is my home? Kids looking around at their house, their home setting, about how they get to school, how they get home from school, these kinds of things. Nice projects. Climate change lends itself very, very well to project-based learning. It really does. And that's an example. Even an 8-year-old can walk around the house and say, Mum and Dad, why do you always leave that light on? When you drive me to school, why don't you switch off the car engine when you're waiting? It's simple things like that. And an 8-year-old can do that. They love to tell their parents what to do, don't they? Beach or park cleans, taking groups of students out and physically picking up tin cans, paper, general waste, basically, that selfish people throw there. Useful project. And then they can count how many bags they filled, make some posters, write a blog in whatever age group you're working with. And also connect to it, stretching it beyond climate towards sustainability, thinking about diets. Part of sustainability is eating well. And also thinking a little bit about our well-being, where our food comes from, these kinds of things. So it's fantastic for projects. And these projects are happening, I know, because teachers tell me about them. But remember, that's what we're doing. But this is what I think we need to do. We need to be a bit more radical. First of all, we need to manage the attitudes of our communities. And let me explain what I mean. Teachers often say this to me. It's political. Yeah, it is. but so is learning English. Learning a foreign language is a political act as well. Yes, it is political, and lots of things are political, but that's nothing to do with politics. Um, I have teachers have said to me, "You're politicizing English teaching." I said, "Well, I don't think that's quite what I'm doing, but fine, you get your own opinion." So that's an attitude that does exist in our profession, and I just love that quotation. Also in Marseille in the south of France this summer. So the other thing, I don't know whether you know about Margaret Mead. If you've heard of Margaret Mead, Maria is nodding. She does. Margaret Mead was an American anthropologist who worked in the 1930s, 1950s, a feminist writer, slightly discredited because it appears some of her research she made up. It wasn't actually research, but never mind. We won't worry about that. But that quotation, I think, is fantastic. It's a double sword, double side to it. And never doubt a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Stop. It's the only thing that ever has. So it's not too late to do something about this. And we're running out of ideas. People say climate change is not a thing. Well, just watch the TV news for the last 3 months. It's everywhere. Spain has had just appalling floods. You've probably seen on the east coast of Spain, around Valencia, south of Barcelona, with people dying and the most horrible circumstances. And that's just in Europe. I mean, it's all everywhere. So it's not too late. And we've run out of choices. We've got to do something. And another thing people say is, my job is to teach English, that's all. Well, I don't agree with that. I think your job is to teach. It's not the same thing. And sometimes, I mean, I run a lot of CPD for teachers around the world, and I'll often ask them, say, what's your job? And say, I teach English. I say, no, you don't. You teach. Because there's a lot of other things, when you're teaching, adolescents, you're often also steering them through the horrible psychological, physical, and mental changes that are going on when you're about 14 or 15. It comes to us, so we do that as well. We do a lot more than that. So I think that's very important as well, to get over that belief. And it probably connected with your being political thing, I imagine. I'm not sure. What we need to do as students, well, never forget sustainability is all around us. Film, literature, music. There's so much to engage with. I'm afraid the music I've listed there probably gives away my age a bit, but I'm sure there's younger people's music. I should have asked my sons, but I didn't. There's a lot of songs around that you might not know that are about sustainability and the climate crisis. Films. I mean, obviously there was a recent film, Don't Look Up 2021, which I didn't like, but I thought it was very interesting. What it said, Erin Brockovich, with Julia Roberts, I think is in that one, is a great film about pollution, An Inconvenient Truth, Al Gore's book made into a film, and Greta Thunberg. There are lots and lots of getting this kind of stuff into classes, film, literature, short stories around climate and broader sustainability. And the great thing about these is, particularly the songs, they're not scary. And I'll explain what I mean about them not being scary a little bit later on, but I think it's quite important. The other thing that one of the other things that climate and sustainability has presented us with is finally an opportunity to use 21st century skills. Because every course book that you find around the world now seems to say 21st century skills, communication, collaboration, creativity, all this stuff. But then you think they never practice them. They just put them in the books. It's there. But finally, we have an opportunity to engage with the challenges, to communicate, to argue, to persist, to explain, getting students to write a letter to the local mayor saying, why don't we have electric bicycles, or why don't we have electric buses at just local level? Okay, they would be normally done in Greek, but they can write it in English. Why not? And then translate it into Greek if they really want to send it. 21st century skills, communicating, working together on that collaboration. And the city writes back and says, well, they're coming in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, critical thinking. Why is it taking 10 years? So finally, we're able to put the 21st century skills into a proper use with a real cause, rather than just kind of, they're often taught, practiced rather artificially. In fact, in my experience, they're not usually practiced at all in course books. They're just there. Get students to engage with greenwashing. That's the forest behind my house in Scotland. And so I'm quite interested in green things because I'm surrounded by them. But I'll tell you about this forest in a minute. Greenwashing, if you don't know the term, is the way that organizations say they are sustainable. But when you start reading and thinking, think, wait a minute, I'll give you an example. Heathrow Airport in London, you've probably been to Heathrow Airport. It says it is a sustainable airport. Now, the words aeroplane and sustainable to me don't sit very well in the same sentence. But when you actually go to the trouble of reading their document, they don't include the flights. They include the shops, coffee bars, whatever restaurants you have at the airport, but not the flights, because they say the flights belong to somebody else. Yeah, British Airways, Emirates, whoever comes there. But my argument would be, well, if you weren't there, they wouldn't be landing there. They don't just land by surprise. So that's what greenwashing is. And I think particularly with high school and university level students, you can give them really interesting, intellectually driven tasks. Looking at this, say, wait a minute, this is nonsense. And it's companies, cities, all sorts of organizations greenwash. Those forests, not the one by the river, but the big forests at the back are actually artificial. Nearly all the forests in the south of Scotland were planted looking at them about 40 years ago, and they will be harvested. They harvest them every 40 years and start again. So it's the coniferous trees at the bottom are always there, but the others disappear. And the forests around my house sometimes disappear, and it looks like when I've had a haircut, it's a huge, massive, many hectares of bare hillside. It's another environmental question there. Intersectionality. Intersectionality is a term that's been used in development circles for a long time, but not quite so much in ELT. Intersectionality is where there's a connection between a number of issues. For example, climate change, child deaths, gender, economic equality. Now, this is a really horrible quotation from the UN, but I do show it to people. Every day, around about 1,000 children die from sanitation-related issues. And a lot of those sanitation issues are driven by too much water or not enough water, or sometimes both. So floods and droughts, many countries manage to have both. And it's the major cause of child death. So there's an impact, therefore, and if you stretch that impact, an impact on women, because they tend to be the ones that collect water and have to care for children. These tend to be low income contexts. It's not a problem in richer countries. It hits children a lot. And it also is that water, particularly, is a cause of war and conflicts. Water is the number one resource that causes wars. So getting kids to understand the idea of intersectionality is really, really interesting, where they see actually it's all connected somehow. So I think that's something to think about as well in terms of awareness raising. But if we're really, really honest about it, what we do will have some impact. But the really big impact is the global north and the relationship the global north has with the big oil and gas companies, and the impact on the global south. Most of the damage from climate is in sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and some parts of Asia. The big polluters are in the north. Essentially, China is bad, but it's essentially the US and Europe. So that really is something we have to think about. And again, living in Scotland, Scotland is unusual. We have 100% naturally generated electricity because, first of all, there's not very many of us. There's only about 5 million. And two, we have lots of hills, mountains, and rivers, and it's very windy. So it's actually quite easy for us to generate electricity sustainably. But, we need to think about this, and I think students need to think about it as well. So do we want to make our students into climate activists? I don't know the answer to that. It's something that every teacher needs to think about. Some teachers believe we should, some teachers believe we shouldn't. I don't know. That's Trafalgar Square a couple of years ago, a picture I took. I don't know, but it's something to think about. So there it is. And maybe we need to think a little bit about our course books as well. There's a couple of quotations there. The references will appear at the back, but course books are getting better. There's no doubt about it. They talk about the importance of, to some extent, of alternative energy, of recycling, of traveling less, maybe a flight. They're beginning to engage with ways of mitigating it. but they don't yet point their finger at what really causes it, which is the large oil and gas companies that remove us with the choices to have sustainable energy because they make more money from us. So, um, in a sense, the last quote there, our course books tend to take a shallow environmental view, is quite important. Aaron Stibbe is an academic in the UK, teaches at the University of Gloucestershire, and he writes a lot about ecolinguistics. The references at the end, you can find him if you're interested. His stuff is absolutely fascinating. So I do recommend him. The second one is his as well. He talks about course books being a Trojan horse for spreading the values that lead to environmental destruction in the first place. There are still course books that kind of glorify success on international jet-setting lifestyles, which have been the major contributors to it. They still focus a lot on very powerful cars rather than traveling by train, all these kinds of things. It may not seem very much as just a course book, but remember the 1.5 billion. They're the kids who are using these books, and so it kind of filters forwards. But I do recommend looking particularly at Aaron Stibbe's work, and I say he's referenced right at the end of the talk. Oh, okay for time, yeah. We also need to, as teachers, to know what we're doing. One of the things that came out of that survey I mentioned before that I did just before COVID, a more recent work I've done, is a lot of teachers say, yeah, I need to do this. I need to get in. I get it. I get this completely. We do need to get students engaged with this, but I don't know what to do. So professional development for teachers in this area, I think, is really important. And I do some of it myself. And teachers love to get engaged. One reason they like to get engaged is it actually motivates students. It's a really good motivator. The kind of generation Greta, the sort of 15 to 30-year-olds, are very focused on it wherever they are in the world, just wherever you speak to kids. And it's a motivator. They like the topic. They're angry about it. They blame us. They blame older people for it. Fair enough. I think we need to be blamed for it. So CPD of some kind is important. And another thing that I'd like you to think about is the idea of eco-literacy. Now, some of you may know Daniel Goleman, his work on emotional intelligence. He's at Berkeley. There he is. I mean, he's interesting because he's not an academic. He's actually a journalist. A lot of people think he's an academic, but he's not. He's a scientific journalist. And the link is at the bottom there. He's written this really interesting book called Eco-Literate. The idea of eco-literacy, which is getting teenagers or students in general, particularly university students, to understand and embed sustainability into their thinking. And the book is there, but also the website at the bottom has got some interesting stuff in there. A lot of interesting stuff. I like him because he's a journalist, not an academic. No disrespect to academic, but you can actually understand what he's talking about. He writes very clearly and accessibly about building empathy for all forms of life. Embracing sustainability as a community practice. Just make it a normal day-to-day thing. Make sustainability built into everything you do. Is there another way of doing this? Do I really need to drive my car today? Well, there is a bus. It's a bit awkward because I'll have to carry my shopping, but okay, I can manage that. I can do that. And sometimes it's just those little decisions. And tied to that is anticipating consequences. Getting students to always think, as I say, well, if I take my car, that won't make any difference. It's just a 20-minute drive to the supermarket. It's nothing, which is true. One car make no difference. But if 1 million people that day around the globe are making similar decisions, it begins to become rather more significant. So using public transport, lobbying for public transport, writing these letters to the mayor and saying, come on, we need buses that are not diesel. We've got some electric buses in London, but we've still got plenty of diesel ones as well. Well, the one I really like from Daniel Goleman's work is the idea of encouraging students to see what they can't see. What I mean is, if you live in the UK, there are some consequences of climate change. A bit. It's getting a bit hotter in the summer. It rains a bit more, but it's always rained in the UK, people say. I mean, I live in Scotland, it rains every day, basically. It's kind of normal for us. So the immediate consequences are not so big. But if you live in sub-Saharan Africa, the consequences are big and immediate and now and devastating. So it's encouraging kids to say, okay, in your nice house in Edinburgh, you don't see much of this. But what you can't see is what's going on in Somalia, what's going on in Kenya, what's going on in some parts of Latin America. But also reminding them that climate change in particular in Europe is coming to get us. It's coming our way. And we've seen it in Spain in the last few weeks. As I said, you've seen it in Greece. A lot of Central Europe has seen quite appalling floods. It's coming our way. And it's just going to get worse and worse to it very quickly. And that's evidenced by what's happening already. So encouraging students to see what they can't see, because they can see their own town, their own community, their own country, but that's not going to help. So I do recommend looking at Daniel's stuff. I mean, he's very accessible too. But if you've read his emotional, I mean, he invented emotional intelligence. It's invented is the right word, and eco literacy is his new thing coming along there. Some things to think about, and this is I talked before about being scary. Eco anxiety. Particularly young teenagers get anxious about this. They worry about it. They get scared. There was a great article in the Guardian newspaper recently called "No More Dead Polar Bears, Please," because there was this idea that if you show students pictures of dead polar bears, it will scare them into engaging with the climate change. It doesn't. It just makes them anxious and upsets them. I mean, I don't like pictures of dead polar bears. I hope nobody does. And now the thinking is it's more sensible to engage with solutions, what we can do, rather than these devastating pictures. So eco anxiety and equally eco fatigue. But I've had enough of this green thing. I've just had enough of it. Well, that's how we manage it in class. And lots of things students have enough of. But eco anxiety, eco fatigue, two things to think about. Perceived relevance. Well, I live in Greece. Nothing to do with me. It's not my problem. Well, actually, it was recently. And sadly, I suspect it will be again. And what about your friends and neighbours in Spain? And I've had conversations not far long ago with some students in Central Europe, and I talked about it. Then one boy came with students. One boy he came on his Zoom. He said, "Yeah, my grandmother's house was washed away in a flood this year." He said, "Was that climate change?" Yeah, I said, "Yeah, it was." And you could just see the little light bulb come on, and he said he thought, we've got it. Oh, you've got it. Yeah, we've all got it in different degrees. So the relevance of it. Be cautious about the complexity of concepts as well. As an English teacher, you don't need to know anything about climate science. Don't panic about that. Many of us have taught, I mean, I've taught pilots, but I can't fly a plane. I'm not teaching them to fly planes. I'm teaching them to be able to read the manual, to go on the training courses that will tell them how to fly the next new plane. That's a different thing. So don't panic about not having the climate science. With that said, if you work, for example, in a secondary school, if you can get the geography teacher to come in and give the kids 10 things you need to know about climate science, I think it's a really nice kind of CLIL kind of cross curricular activity that could very easily do. I think it would be the geography teacher or possibly the biology teacher. Anyway, a teacher who knows about these things can come in and just do some linking work. And also, when we talk about climate activism, how far can we go politically or culturally? That's your call. Some countries in the world, I don't think Greece is one of them at all, but some countries in the world, the word activism will get you into trouble very quickly. Others, if you live in Sweden, there's something wrong with you if you don't go marching on the streets. So it depends where you live. And not all activism is good. Some of you may know about Extinction Rebellion in the UK, XR, but not just in the UK, who, for example, glue themselves to motorways, to roads, to try to stop people driving. They do some very extreme things. I don't think that throwing pink paint over the Mona Lisa is going to help anyone. In fact, if we go back to Hearts and Minds, I think it will probably lose Hearts and Minds doing that. So not all activism is good. It's just not all bad. Hearts and Minds, there it is. How do we get people angry and determined to do something? I don't think it's by throwing paint over, artwork. Well, some people think it works, but I can't quite see why. So I think, whatever. Just by the way, as an aside, that picture there, I was in a refugee camp in the Middle East back in February it was this year, and the kids who are Syrian refugees in that camp in Jordan, some of them were born in the camp. That's one of their classrooms. They were born in the camp, and they can't leave. and probably never will leave. The camp is in the desert. There were no trees in the desert. And some of the children who drew those pictures on the outside of their classrooms have never seen a tree. Just think for a minute, a child who has never seen a tree is a devastating thing. So they drew these from pictures, from, I don't know, book pictures. So that was something else to think about. At an institutional level, well, I think we need to get all the stakeholders involved, people who are in the educational system, in the school system, particularly. There probably are in the Greek education system lots of environmental initiatives. How can we connect with English teaching? If you're in the university sector, how can you? Most universities will have policies and some teaching around sustainability. How can we engage that with the English classes we teach in the university? So it's getting all the stakeholders involved. Publishers, next time the publisher comes into your school with a nice box full of shiny books, ask them where they print them. Ask them if they print on recycled paper. Ask them why they use plastic to pack the books in the box. It's ridiculous. And they still do it. Why do they put plastic covers on the books? That is absurd. Why do we have shiny book covers? We don't need shiny book covers. They're English books, So speaking to the stakeholders, and I constantly lobby publishers, and it does work. They are getting better, but you've got to keep on them. I think most have now stopped packing them in the boxes with plastic bubble wrap stuff. They use recycled paper, old newspapers, old books, whatever you want. So think about that. Get green on the agenda, literally. Nile, who many of you may know in Norwich, teacher training institution there, every staff meeting they have one item on the agenda around sustainability, whatever it is. And so literally on the agenda. It might just be a teacher saying, well, I tried this thing last week with the grade threes. They really enjoyed it. Or has anybody got a video or something I could use to look at drought in sub-Saharan Africa? Whatever it is, just to share ideas. Put on the green lens, basically. Put it on the agenda. And that is why my swimming pond in the forest in Scotland, by the way. It's freezing all year, but never mind. It makes you swim faster. I like the idea of schools having a green hub in a classroom, in a hallway, not much more than a notice board where anything related to sustainability can be pinned or posted or written. And at first, nothing happens. Then people start add more and more and more. And somebody puts up, I watched this, I heard this song last night. I think it's about the environment. Great, I'll listen to it. So it's just all around embedding sustainability into the way that we think and the way that we speak. So kind of a green hub with local ideas as well, particularly local content. Every city, in Thessaloniki, I'm quite sure there are green initiatives from the city. So it's how you connect to them. And it helps students to take it more seriously when they realize lots and lots of people are talking about it. Create a sustainability committee. I talked there about not reinventing the wheel. The problem with English teachers is, this I've learned in the last 4 years or so, 5 years or so. I always thought English teachers shared things. We were a great community of connectivity and, I've done this, take my lesson plan, use it. No, they don't. They write things and hide them away and don't share them with other teachers. So as a result, you can go into a school and you've got 5 teachers all writing a new sustainability lesson at the same time, which is ridiculous. The idea of a sustainability committee is they make sure that when a nice lesson is written, it's filed away in the drawer that says sustainable lessons so somebody else can come and take it. And it sounds obvious, but when I did the first British Council project around sustainability I did about 6 years ago, I spoke to schools, teacher associations. A lot of teacher associations said, we don't know what's going on. So one in particular sent out a survey and 30 or 40 projects came back that schools had been doing and just not sharing. So I think that's important to create that kind of connectivity and, pooling of ideas. And that's something that Iatefl is working on. I'll come to that in a second. Appoint a green lead. Those are my neighbours. The green lead is someone in a school who's responsible for green stuff. That's not a very technical term, but somebody who asks the school, what about our light bulbs? Are we using low energy light bulbs? Does the air conditioning switch off at night? Do we really need the air conditioning on now? Why have we got the heating on and a window open? Which is actually quite common. and absolutely absurd when you think about it. So it's somebody who looks both at the mitigation of the challenges from climate, but also looks at wider sustainability issues. So a green lead, and schools are getting them. It's beginning to happen now, but I think that's quite important as well. Yeah, share within and out with your institution. Out with is Scottish English, SSE, meaning outside, something out with. So within and out with your institution. Share everything you do. And if you're in a private language school and you have relationships with a primary school, maybe you could take some of your content down to the primary school teachers and say, you could try this. Within the teacher association, you're a TA. Teacher associations are about sharing. That's why we have them. To making you could Maria could very easily with Maria task now, giving Maria some homework, could very easily write to all members saying, what are you doing? Any sustainability lessons, ideas, topics, share them here, make a Google Drive, put them in there, anyone can access them. It's not difficult. But again, teachers are very protectionist about things. They've always in my lesson, no one else is touching it. And it may not be a great lesson, but it doesn't matter. You can adapt it. You can play with it. It's not a problem. So action planning. Well, that's where you come in. That's what the hillsides look like when the trees have gone, by the way. That would have been covered in trees before I took that photograph. That's what happens to them. It is up to you what you do with all this. So I'll tell you what we're doing at Iatefl. In September, we launched this thing, imaginatively named Green Iatefl, and we are working on a number of areas. If you're a member of Iatefl, you will probably have seen that Iatefl Voices 300, edition 300, came out in September. Was everything in it was about sustainable issues. The articles, the book reviews, the discussions with the associates, the SIG coordinators were interviewed. It's packed with sustainability stuff. Every edition of Iatefl Voices now has a sustainability column. The one that's coming out will come out in January or just before Christmas, I think, has a big piece by Adrian Underhill around institutional sustainability, for example. So we've instigated that. We are now working on what is basically a hub, our website. And on there, we are going to produce a series of toolkits, a toolkit for classroom, using ELT content in the classroom, institutional toolkit for making your school or other institution greener. I'm working on a toolkit for teacher development, people working in teacher development, how they can embed sustainability into pre-service teacher training and in-service teacher development. These things will take time. You won't see very much for the Iatefl conference in Edinburgh, but we are progressing it now. And we are also going to be opening a section where teachers and institutions can upload ideas, videos, lesson plans. We will have to check them for copyright and all these sorts of things, and they will then be made available to the general public. We are asking publishers to share and exam people to share ideas and initiatives that will also be put in the public domain, and also a section for videos in the same area. So we are progressing things. The Green Iatefl is launched, but that was the easy part. We're now doing the hard work, which is actually making it happen. But we will be contacting associates saying, well, I've already made the first contact with associates saying, come on, we're going to need your help with this. And that's where, as I said, to go back to the previous slide, that's where you come in. We can't do it on our own. So those are the references that I mentioned to you before. And I'll send Maria a set of the slides as well when I've finished. So you can, if you're interested, you can go to them. Stibby is really good. And I've got somewhere a video of him of quite a recent session he did. I mean, he's great. He's very tough with people, but he makes some very interesting points. So question and answer time in a second. And I saw that rather lovely street sign in a market town in the north of England. Walk slowly, softly humming to yourself. I don't know whether it's an official sign or it's just somebody put it up, but I quite like the idea of walking around town slowly humming to myself. So that's it. And we're not almost there by any means. We've still got a long way to go. That's another picture in one of the forests near where I live. So that's everything that I wanted to say. So I'll stop sharing. And if anyone has any questions, you can either shout at me or you can pop them into the chat if there's anything. I haven't looked at the chat. That chat's empty. I don't know if it's good or bad,
Thank
Maria.
you.
Sure.
We haven't got anything in the chat, but I do have questions.
Oh dear. Okay, go on, Maria.
Okay, so I've been struggling with two topics that do not seem interconnected, and yet they are. So here we are trying to minimize the use of paper, especially paper that is going to be torn, lost, and not put in good use. For example, photocopies. So one of the things that I found that I felt could be sustainable was not giving the photocopies, especially to my university students who tend to be like 30, 40 a class, but just putting them on Google Classroom, giving the students permission to use their digital devices. It stays there. It is always accessible. It is always easy to find, and no problem. And at uni, it did work. I mean, it did save a lot of trouble. But with children, with my secondary students, this is, oh my God, where is it? How can I write the answers? The concept of just write which worksheet, write the answers in your notebook, keep them there. And yet, then you get parents. Miss Sarpazian, do they need their phone when they study? What is this about a digital dictionary? Do they need to have a laptop open in front of them? No, they need to spend 40 hours leafing through a dictionary that nobody uses anymore. So now I'm torn between the two because I haven't met with strong opposition from parents. When I tell them, yes, they need it, it's yes, they need it. And then, is the computer sustainable? Because it does use electricity.
Well,
So,
yes, there's a million complications around this. I mean, course books, English, if you think of a typical course book, any course book. Now, I think I don't know about Greek government schools. Government schools here, course books are class sets. They're used maybe for 5 or 6 years, so the children don't write in them, which is fine. That's quite sustainable. Private language schools, they're used once. And I reckon this is based upon zero research, I should tell you, but I reckon the average usage of a page in an English language course book is probably about 2 minutes in its entire life. If you think about it, really, on average, it's a bit longer if they have
pages
to
might be
write.
zero.
Sometimes, yeah. So you average it out, it's probably 2 or 3 minutes. They might look back at it before an exam, but they probably won't. That is absurd. But the problem we have is the entire business model of publishers is built upon paper books. And people are used to paying $10, $15, $20 for a paper book. But if it's to be purely digital, people are used to paying very little for digital stuff. Very little. Okay, there's no printing costs, no distribution costs, but the cost of writing is the same.
Yes, and the ideas, the originality.
It's the same. It's the same.
How
So
close are we are
well,
to
I think
this?
first of all, depends where you live. It depends about connectivity in schools, depends on the availability of tablets or laptops or whatever you're using. Because without the devices, it doesn't work. Because if you have half the class with devices, half without, you have a digital divide, and that is not acceptable. That's I think in terms of equity and inclusion, we need to make sure that every child has
I
either their own
know
device
that
or
many
access to a device.
I know that many private schools, especially in Athens, give a tablet to their students when they enter.
It's
And it is
becoming
part of
common.
the, yes, it's part of the tuition fees, and it is included. I think it actually stays at school. They cannot take it home. They cannot, it's not their property per se.
It's borrowed.
It's
Yeah.
borrowed, it's on loan while they are at school, but it does replace some course books from what I've heard, but Athenian private schools, not Thessaloniki-based ones.
Yeah.
The other thing I was teaching, but that has to do with my fascination with materials design and publications and publishing in general, is that what I would like as a teacher is a course book that allows me to tailor make the course, like things that I can pick out and I can, it's like a downloadable thing so that I can customize what I want to go into this unit, and then my students can download the unit. But there are several ethical concerns. None of this has anything to do with green
Well,
initiatives.
it does actually. It does, Maria. He says, interrupting her impolitely. It does, because the impact of what we're doing now, of live streaming, of keeping photos, keeping videos, storing them in the cloud, the environmental impact is vast, because the servers that store your photographs and my photographs, and the server in somewhere, it'll tell us where it is in the world, that we're used in Germany from the UK, the server that we're on now gets hot and it has to be cooled. And the impact of that process, of the amount of water that is used and the steam and heat that is put into the atmosphere, is huge. And I don't use AI for ethical reasons, a number of ethical reasons. My main one is that currently estimates, and I got this from Vicky Salmel, estimates of the global impact of AI are that the global impact of AI is already exceeding that of global aviation. So if you use AI, you're much worse than the person who goes on holiday quite a few times with EasyJet or something. And AI is new. I mean, it's what, 2 years it's been around, at least in for normal people. Non-techies, it's 2 years we've had access to it, less than. So, we need to think about it. I mean, Vicky's done a lot of work. It's actually how you interrogate AI, because people use it like a search engine and it's not a search engine. That's the problem. There may be solutions, but there's, and Vicky's far more qualified than me to talk about that. But there is an impact. Obviously, the environmental cost of producing the devices, the laptops, the phones, the tablets, is considerable. And most of these figures, these calculations, are probably impossible to do.
And of course, we also have the other issue with the free copies. I mean, Greece is notorious for this. If you talk to any Greek representative of international publishing houses, they will tell you that it's becoming ridiculous. We want
piracy.
Yeah.
Digital stuff is much harder. Is much harder to pirate because it's locked. I mean, I'm sure you can, but it's much harder. In paper copies, you just put it in a photocopier. Basically, it's quite easy. But anyone can do it.
I've been thinking it would not be that difficult for publishers to prepare, to have a drive or a platform where we can download the things that we need to sample the material. And then if you want to pilot it, perhaps you have a separate, I mean, how much will you be piloting it? You don't need 4 lessons. Who would ever spend 4 lessons to pilot?
Quite unnecessary.
Just one. And I mean, even if you use one idea, I sometimes take the new books and show them to the students of the previous class. And I say, if you could choose between this book and the book we're using, which one would you go for? And I see that they leaf through the book and they tell me stuff that is what I noticed pretty much. So I don't think more than one lesson would be. I mean, we don't need the whole book to pilot it.
But you see, well, what we've been talking about, Marie, and I think someone's maybe put this in the chat, is mitigating our damage, basically the damage that we do, which is maybe, well, there are 2 things. One is study abroad because of the flying. But I don't necessarily want to be the person that says you shouldn't go and study abroad, because people benefit from it. But anyway, that's the thing. It is a thing. It's an elephant in the room. The other thing is books. But I think we're looking in the wrong direction. I think we need to look at what we should put into our lessons, the education side, which is much more fun than we should be sensible. We shouldn't leave the lights on all night or leave the air conditioning running all weekend, though it doesn't stop people doing it. And if the window's open, turn the heating off or don't open the window, whatever it is. There's that side, but I think the educational side is much more important, because that's actually what's going to make the impact. Producing young people who, when they graduate from school, graduate from university, are saying, and they become citizens, saying, actually, this is not acceptable. Why don't we have electric buses? Why do we still have old deep? This is, and getting angry about it and saying, why don't we have, sustainable electricity? Why don't we use the sun to generate? I mean, the biggest solar electricity generation in the world is actually Morocco, interestingly. They've got huge solar farms and they've got a lot of sun, obviously. And it's also in their curriculum. They're a really good example of Morocco, which actually, I've worked for the Moroccan government recently, and they're doing some quite interesting things. So I think it's actually on the educational side, getting kids engaged. So they actually think, a thousand students, 1,000 babies or young people die every day. That's not right. That can't be right. We need to do something about this. And I think giving them the tools to agitate, to write, to talk about this, I think that's probably more important than worrying about the impact we have.
Can I say something?
Margarita, yeah, of course you can.
That I have so many. It was an amazing talk, and Maria knows that I've been lots of talks and I've delivered lots of talks, but this one really was really great, and I think
Well,
this
it's
room
very,
should be
very sweet of you. Thank
today.
you.
This room should be packed today, and it's not, and I think it's part of the problem.
Oh,
Maria
yes.
Maria was talking about publishers. I have been working for a local Greek publisher for the last 7 years, so I've learned how to look at things from both sides, right? From both perspectives. And like Maria was talking about her students who are not digitally literate enough to find things in her drive or whatever. But the same the same happens with teachers. If you give them digital copies, they will not have where to find them, how to use them. There will be millions of requests, and they will get upset, and they will switch, and they will choose the other publisher who does give away print. Yeah. Okay. So instead of we cannot just criticize publishers all the time, because they do their job and they try to meet the needs of the market.
And they react to the market. They are business people, and they are a multi-billion-dollar industry. They're not there to lose money.
Oh, they're not there for fun. But you see, what we're trying to do with Iatefl is to get all the stakeholders together, including if all the publishers agree, we're all going to do this.
Absolutely. Yes, I know.
That will make a difference. Yeah. I know you from both sides of the fence. Yeah.
Yeah, because now, after having been with them for a few years, now I can actually see why they do some things. It's not that they don't want to, but yes, they are forced. Okay, I have so many comments here because I was writing things down, and I want to say a few things. One, about the different types of sustainability, which one of the people that you interviewed.
They were Iatefl trustees.
Iatefl trustees. Different types of sustainability. So I think another problem is that people do not see the connection between different types of sustainability.
Right.
So like you said, there's only this one chapter devoted to environmental sustainability, and that's it. Whereas another chapter is about social issues, and people do not see the connection between social issues and sustainability.
Intersectionality is the thing. It's really important.
Exactly. So, for example, they don't see how human slavery adds to this issue, like
absolutely.
Side. Yes, I've been reading this book about how slavery and environmental distractions are connected. So the title is Blood and Earth by Kevin Bales.
Okay, I know the name.
So you've read it, yeah?
I haven't read it, but I know the name of the book.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that this is an important issue that we should be trained how to disrupt every single lesson with questions that are related to environmental sustainability and all kinds of sustainability, because wherever there are poor people, they will be exploited by traffickers, and
correct.
Traffickers put them in work positions which destroy the environment. And another thing, I'm not going to say everything that I have written here, but there are so many things. I wanted to say one more thing, and I'm forgetting what it is. So, you mentioned the unit about shopping and how our choices are related to environment. When you were saying this, I thought you would mention also trying not to eat that much meat. I know that it's a bit controversial because we don't want to influence young people so much, to children especially, to change their eating habits, but maybe focusing a little bit on the benefits of not eating meat every single day.
I agree completely.
In that direction without upsetting the parents too much, who believe that meat is necessary. So
it's interesting, as I was going to say about eating meat. I mean, as I say, I live in a rural area. We have a lot of deer. Wild deer, lots of all over the place. And I had a friend who came to stay recently, and she's vegan, and we got to talking about, you know, veganism and the environment. She said, but I would eat a wild deer that had been shot in the forest behind. She said I wouldn't hesitate.
Okay.
She said because it's had a perfectly natural life, minimal environmental impact, killed with one, because where we live, they're not killed by members of the public, they're killed by professional marksmen who don't miss. The deer knows nothing about it.
But
She
then
said,
you give
I would do that.
but then you give hunters the chance to say, yeah, but the ones that we
don't have hunters. We have professional marksmen. It's their job because we have too many deer, and actually,
okay, but it also depends on the context, right? Because there's a very
some
thin
countries
line.
you have hunters. We can't. They're professionals. They shoot them for a job. That's what they do. It's not sport. So she said the animals have had the best possible life. They're killed instantly. She said, I consider that to be totally sustainable. And she's probably right. We actually have too many of them, which is another problem. You know.
Well, anyway, we live in a country which is not, in which we have so many hunters who are actually poachers very often.
Well, that's another question, yeah.
Yeah, and who also mistreat animals. They're hunting dogs.
Context is everything.
Context is everything, yes. Anyway, an amazing talk.
Oh, you're very kind, thank you.
I
a little yellow hand, is that a legacy hand or a real hand?
No. I put my hand up because, like Margarita said, I don't want to have to explain to parents why I talk to children about vegetarianism, but it's a great way to discuss contradiction in class, and that not all topics can be entirely black or white, and that people are entitled to their opinion. But whenever the decision comes to, so miss, we shouldn't eat meat, it's like, this is a decision you will make when you're at an age to sustain yourself, to have a dog, to make your own decisions, like support your own house. This is not for now. Now you're still growing, you're still becoming the person you will be, so that I can defer it to a future date. But it is, I mean, in Greece, as you know, we eat a lot of meat, and our basic street food is meat. So when you tell children
not the Mediterranean diet, yes.
No, not at all. And what I find ridiculous is that although the very traditional families and the religious families fast, you can see children eating meat during the times when we're getting very close to the peak of the fasting, which is not what you would see in a Muslim country, when there are no exceptions. It's like you follow it. It's not, you either observe it or you don't observe it. There are no half measures. Here there are, obviously.
And how much meat do they eat right after the fast is finished, right?
I was
go crazy.
Yeah, I think we eat the meat that we haven't eaten in the 50 days of Lent during that weekend. I think people go
that weekend cancels it out. Yeah.
We counteract the lack of meat. So
you've
got many. Sorry,
I was going to say these are all
to tell students. Sorry.
No, all I'm saying is that we don't. I think the danger is that we lecture people, whether it's parents or whether it's colleagues or students. We should try to guide them towards having the linguistic skills to find the answers themselves. I really think that's important. You know, to go online and say, actually, I've decided to stop eating meat because I've found this information. Fine. I think eco-bullying or eco-shaming is a poor idea. It actually makes it worse. It just turns people off. They don't want to talk. They don't want to engage. And the problem we have in the UK is the environmental movement is seen as a kind of middle-class hobby. Many, well, like it, I mean, I'm talking about half my life, which is down here in London. People who have jobs, for example, security guards working in shops, have to be at work very early in the morning. And our public transport is not great, so they tend to have to drive to work and not the train. Trains here are expensive. They say it's cheaper to drive. I can't afford to take the train. So it's become a kind of middle club. Well, you're okay, you can afford to take the train, and you don't have to be at work till 9 o'clock. So there's a culture war in this country about it as well, which is another complication.
Context is everything. You said it. Context is everything. And it's the geography, it's the social class, it's the way it is perceived. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Did you say eco-shaming? What was the term that you used?
Eco-shaming.
I say eco-shaming or eco-bullying, depending on my mood.
Yeah. So yeah, also, but I'm going to go back to eating meat. Like, it's not a good idea to make them feel bad about the fact that they eat meat.
Not at all.
But maybe, you know, ask them to research how much protein there is in other types of food and make them think about it and reach their own conclusions.
And animal welfare, exploring animal welfare too. Exactly. Any other questions, anyone? What's in the chat box?
We've had some comments from Evangelia.
Oh, I've got it.
Related to sustainability. And I think, I mean, obviously foreign language schools could be the beginning of change. I mean, one way would be to
So you mean private language schools? Yeah?
Yes, the ones that where most of us are employed. Let's say that you are teaching a book by Oxford University Press. You buy the sets, you lend them to the students. They do not write in the books, and they return them at the end of the year. Next group takes them, and the circle repeats itself. But I don't think any school would invest, and there would be problems because children get to be sloppy. I mean, if we want to start limiting our digital footprint in that area, we would need to start with the public school that gives away books, and then they
big numbers,
burn them at the end of year. Okay, I haven't seen this in some years now, but I witnessed it some years ago, and because my the high school where I went as a student is right across from my house. I actually physically went there and started screaming and shouting. I went there because I was afraid some of my students were there. But
I remember your post about this.
Yes, I did post about it because I cannot think of anything worse than a country that is nearly bankrupt giving children books so that they can study, and then at the end of the year they burn them. You don't want the book, give it to another person, return it to the school so that it can be used.
Or to underprivileged schools or something, exactly, use them,
And we are in an area of Thessaloniki where underprivileged cannot be used. I mean, this is not a reaction to the book itself or any thought being given to the sustainability movement. This is simply, I hate chemistry, the exams are over, I burn the chemistry book. But it shows how can I put it, how badly informed or misinformed our youths are right now.
Well, that's the opportunity, isn't it, for us, or for you, in the case of Greece. So there's a lot to think about. It's quite complicated.
What an interesting discussion we've had. Thank you so much, Chris.
You're very welcome, as ever. I'll send you the slides.
Thank you so much.
Today or tomorrow.
And we will share the recording. Thank you, Chris. See you all again
on
the 1st of December. And Chris, we're definitely going to knock on your door about those sensitive, fractured communities and your work with teachers. Thank you. Okay, lovely Tesolites. Have a beautiful weekend. Keep working.
All the very best. Thank you for inviting me. And enjoy. I was going to say enjoy the weekend, but it's a bit late now, isn't it?
Indeed. There is no weekend.
Next weekend. Okay, bye for now.
Bye. Bye-bye.